Hi, welcome back to my channel. It's Susan Corbett, Custom Machine Quilter. Today we're going to look at some inventive custom quilting that's also all over quilting, and it's all about the texture. Between all the seam allowances and the batting, that's what's going to create all this great texture here. This is kind of a heavy quilt, but not too heavy. And gosh, it just looks great. So let's get into it. So I'm working on this little tumbler quilt. These pieces are tiny, and they have these great little patches here. So I planned the quilting around these little kitties. So they're not very big, as you can tell. And the quilt isn't all that big, but it's nothing but all these itty bitty little patches. So what I'm doing is mainly all these diagonal lines, and you see how they're going from the top of the tumbler to the bottom and just all the way through, over and over and over. You've got two different increments. It's about a 1/2 inch at the smallest, and then probably 3/4 to 1 inch at the largest. So to break it up, what I've done is isolate some parts of it. I don't know how well this is going to show here, but this is a great big tall pyramid, and then I'm filling in with some horizontal lines here. So that's one element to break it all up. The other thing I've done is this is going to be a great big diamond shape, and I'm not sure how I'm going to fill up the insides. I've got the pins in there just to kind of stabilize it until I make up my mind what I'm going to do. And then over here, I have a square on point. So in this part, I'm going to do some dimensional quilting, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do in here. I've ditch quilted around each of these little guys because I want them to stand out. So most of the quilting is on the diagonal, like so. And I've decided over on this part of the quilt, on the lower right, I'm changing the direction some. And maybe in the parts where there's nothing but diagonal lines, I think I might go back in here and add some dimensional quilting in some of these rows to make them stand out. I'm not exactly sure. I'm gonna get all the way down to the bottom and see what I think about it, see if anything is showing up, see what it might want. It's just a delightful quilt. So let's see where that goes. This quilt is about, I think it after the quilting it finished like 61 by 67 or something like that. So it's a throw. It's hand pieced. It's paper piecing, all by hand. That's what this client likes to do, English paper piecing. And look at the variety of all these great little fabrics. It's so cute. So I think anybody would normally say, well, you know, there's not much you can do for a quilt like this. Let's just get a pantograph and go for it, or an overall meander or something like that. And I've seen other quilts like this where the quilting is a bunch of just playing with geometry. Let's create some shapes and isolate some, and you know, like maybe use a contrasting thread to help play up the differences. I could have gone back in here and quilted with some blue, but, you know, blue is such a quiet color. Unless I'd picked a navy, you know, or something dark, it still wouldn't show up any better. So I'm just using white all over. This is the kind of quilting that I think is totally worth it. And I'll tell you why. In quilting, these diagonal lines from one, you know, from the top right of the tumbler down to the lower left, what that accomplishes is you sew down the points. So there are not indiscriminate points sticking up right and left. It's quilted uniformly. It looks not all nice and buttoned up and tailored. And, you know, what you don't quilt stands up. And I want to be in control of what stands up. I don't want to leave that to chance, because so often that turns out to be just really ugly, you know, pretty unsightly. Another reason is, you know, I'm just in love with custom. And here is a chance to do something different, unique, special, the kind of quilting that sets this apart. Nobody else is going to have a quilt that looks like this. It's creative and inventive, and I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. So here, I'm limited as to how much of a design I can get in based on the length of the long arm. So I had quilted in most of these concentric squares, but the bottom corner didn't get sewed in, so that's what I've just done there. And at this point, I was still thinking about how I was going to fill that up. But it's quilted enough for now. At this point, I want to get as much of these diagonal lines filled in as possible. So it quilts nice and uniformly, and the fullness doesn't migrate over and over, and then I've got problems. So I want to get as much of the, I guess you could call it the background, quilted before I go back and figure out what to do with some of these geometric shapes I've put in. Now this quilt is pretty much nothing but seam allowance. There's a whole lot of it. So I am quilting with Hobbs Thermore. It's lightweight. I mean, it doesn't weigh hardly anything at all. It's a little bit lofty, which I really like, but it's very thin, transparent. I think a really perfect choice of batting for this kind of quilt. If you used a weighty quilt, bat, you would get a really heavy quilt. And this is pretty heavy. So that's the batting. The thread I'm using is Omni. It's a polyester, not a shiny polyester. It's a good strong thread that's perfect for overall quilting. So all of this is ruler work by hand. None of this is computer quilted at all. This is all very custom. So here I'm negotiating in and around, you know, getting some of these lines to match up, striving for imperceptible stops and starts. I don't know that, even after all these years, after 26 years, I don't know that my stops and starts are where I really want them to be. But, you know, this is where you just do the best you can. And look at the great dimension. Isn't that pretty? This is turning out very well. So here is the beginning of the big, tall triangle at the top of the quilt. And that just gets wider and wider as it goes down. So here I'm extending that big triangle some more. It goes It's not at the very top of the quilt, but it's up there, and it goes all the way to the bottom of the quilt. The extreme right side of that triangle just kind of disappears. It runs off the side of the quilt, which I don't have a problem with. I bet some people would really object to that, but I think that's kind of cool. That's just kind of how it worked out. This is the quilt telling you how it wants to go. And that happens with every quilt. I can think I'm in control, but I'm not exactly in control. The quilt dictates what happens. So I've got the two sides of this triangle put in, and now I'm going to fill in with horizontal lines. So I'm ditch quilting in between each row of patches, and then adding 2 more lines within the row of tumblers. And I was really surprised at how fast this quilt got done. I thought, this is going to be slow and tedious. I'm going to be here for a long time. And that was just not the case. The only thing that was time consuming was making up my mind what I wanted to do and where exactly, and where to start it and where to stop and how big it needs to be. Making those decisions was the only hard part of this quilt. I was very pleased. I did not get a ton of thread breakage quilting from right to left. And that's due to the thread I chose. I mean, sometimes that still happens. But if you'd used a spindly, breakable thread, then you'd have to start and stop with every row of quilting here. And I did start and stop the wider the line got. But here up the narrower parts, I was really pleased that I could just go back and forth. So here is the big diamond that I have made. I believe I turned the quilt. I unpinned it and turned it on its side. So this is a view lengthwise. But this is a directional quilt. See how those little cats have a direction. So these are actually vertical lines. And the reason I decided to quilt lines in here, well, I thought it would be a great contrast with all the horizontal lines I had just put in that great big triangle. So that's one reason. The other one is I could get little pairs of lines here based on, see, we're connecting dots basically. I started to put some lines in here, and then I realized I'm starting and stopping at very different places. How can I describe this? I've left this section pretty long so you can see what I'm talking about, because I don't know that I'll be able to tell you. There's 2 lines based on the top of the little tumbler. So from the outer part of the tumbler to the other outer part, that's 1. But then you've got the inner part left over. So if I quilt both of those, you get pairs of narrowly quilted lines. And I love that texture, always have. It looks like beadboard to me. So it's not, I mean, it's kind of dense without being very dense. And I like the contrast between the vertical lines here up against the diagonal lines that surround it. It just imparts wonderful texture. One of the challenges quilting this quilt is just being able to see. I came very close to quilting over a line I wanted to stop at. You know, all these fabrics are busy. And the thread is not a high contrast. Well, it is in some places, but it was easy to get lost here. So it was just kind of hard to keep track. But I did. You know, I had this pinned down with those little flat flower head pins because the flowers are in color. So I could keep track without marking, because marking wouldn't have helped here at all. I would never have seen the marks. But I could, you know, I can quilt over those pins and they lie flat and they show up. So I could give myself a visual marker of where to stop and start. Now, even before I turned the quilt, another challenge of quilting this was, you know how fabric likes to get pushed over to the side when the presser foot gets to it. And I was hopping around a little bit, quilting here and then quilting way over there. And this quilt really wanted to be quilted, you know, from left to right. 'Cause jumping around did funny things to the fullness of the quilt. So I ripped out a few stitches here and there and used those pins once again to push down the fullness so that it wouldn't bunch up and, you know, be like where it was trapuntoed here and really flat over there. You know, fabric is a fabric and it likes to stretch and move. And managing the fullness as you quilt is just, that has always been a major issue. Unless the top has been starched or something, then it has a chance to stretch and be full here and not over there. So once your decisions are made and you kind of have a handle on what's happening, then quilting these lines becomes a nice, peaceful, joyful thing. It's not tedious. It's just easy and satisfying and fun watching the texture come together. So don't those lines look wonderful? I'm in love with that. Wow. Okay. So I did decide to go back in, and this is going to end up being the lower left side of the quilt. I said right earlier, this is the left side, where I changed the angle of the diagonals. Now they're going in the other direction. It doesn't look like it here because the quilt has been turned. But in between those channels, in the larger spaces, I am doing a filler. It's a herringbone sort of pattern. Normally this is the kind of thing I would do to decorate like the stem of a branch of feathers, but you could do this anywhere. It's just like well, you know, oddly enough, it's more triangles. But look at the texture. I love that. Not hard, a lot of work, but not at all difficult. Well, that was such great fun. Here's some other elements of it. The client was very happy, and I'm very pleased with it. I think it turned out wonderfully. We'll see you next time.